If you've been watching this channel for a while, you know I often cite the four fundamental ingredients of beer: water, malt, yeast, and hops. Having consistent production and access to each of these things is important to keep the beer flowing and the drinking public happy and libated. With over 5,000 breweries here in the US, it's no small feat that farmers, municipalities, and brewers are able to come together to make so much awesome beer. Today we're going to take a closer look at one part of this immense supply chain and examine the hop production statistics that keep a thirsty nation satisfied. Hey, this is Ryan with Beer by the Numbers, and what would beer be without hops? Hops provide a consistent level of bitterness while also bringing a bushel of unique herbal flavors and aromas to the table. But how many hops does it take to brew an entire nation's worth of beer? Where are all these hops produced? And what varieties are most popular for growers here in the United States? I've dug through the data and we'll be covering all this and more in today's video. Let's dive into it. Americans have always been thirsty for hopped beers. So much so that the first hop crops were planted well before US independence, way back in the mid-1600s. Production began in the Massachusetts Bay Colony and later spread south to New York. As the colonies grew, so too did their hop production, and by the time the United States became its own independent nation, the northeastern states had already become the epicenter of hop production in the Western Hemisphere. Hop farms were a common sight throughout New England all the way up until the 1920s, when Prohibition almost entirely killed demand for hops. At the same time, a certain mildew-based disease devastated hop plants in harvests in the 1920s in New England, meaning farmers were basically forced to switch their fields to some other crops. Fortunately for beer lovers, the mildew did not spread to the West Coast, meaning that when Prohibition was repealed, growers in Washington, Oregon, and California were ready to meet the demands of restarting breweries. Ever since the shift westward, hops have never looked back. In 2017, growers harvested 53,000 acres of hops, but 75% of those came from just one state. As most beer nerds can tell you, Washington State is hop mecca here in the United States. Accounting for 3/4 of all hop production in the country, Washington has the perfect climate for growing hops. Hops love to have a lot of water, and they are very thirsty vines growing high up on their trellises. Yakima Valley in particular has the right combination of soil, climate, and water access to make it one of the most important hop growing regions in the world, and are pretty much keeping the vibrant craft beer industry alive here in the US. That's not to say states like Idaho and Oregon aren't doing their part. Idaho grows 13% of the nation's hops, and Oregon 11%, but Washington is the clear king. Now, if you're like me, you've probably already done a little math and realized that 75 plus 13 plus 11 means that only about 1% of hops are grown outside the three main hop growing states. While Idaho and Oregon are each growing around 8,000 acres of hops a year, the next highest state is Minnesota with a pretty paltry 400 acres, and dropping down one more spot gets us to North Dakota with just 200 acres. According to the USDA's reporting, only about a dozen states grow hops commercially, with Nebraska and Northern California being the southernmost reaches of hop production. Demand for hops has been increasing with more and more breweries opening across the country. Hop acreage has increased 80% since 2012, which is pretty crazy growth when it comes to an agricultural product. For comparison, strong growth crops from the last 5 years include wheat at about 4% and cotton earning second place at 15%. Meanwhile, other staple crops like corn and soybean productions have been flat over 5 years, which makes the meteoric rise of hops that much more impressive, at least to this beer nerd. And as a beer nerd, you probably know there are hundreds of varieties of hops out there, some that add bittering, others that add great aromas, and still more that add really unique flavors. For every great beer, there is a great set of hops behind it, lending a wonderful bitter note. So what kind of hops are farms growing in the US? Well, the USDA actually keeps great data on hop variety by acre, and I've poured through their 2017 charts and found some interesting things. In each of the 3 main hop producing states, the most commonly grown hop is the Cascade variety. Cascades are a popular hop in craft brewing because it lends a very floral, citrus, and spicy aroma and provides some balanced bittering potential as well. It's very common in almost all American styles of beers, especially American IPAs, and it's a brewer's go-to when it comes to providing some great aroma for their beer. Other commonly grown hops in the US are Chinook, Centennial, and Citra hops, and together with Cascades, they make the 4 C's of American hops. All 4 varieties are grown in great numbers here in the US and form the backbone of North America's beer scene. Aside from these hops, there are a ton of other hop varietals being grown, mostly American and European varieties. But one last cool piece of data caught my eye. The USDA tracked experimental hop acreage, so we can see that Washington has 10 times as many experimental hop acres than any other state. So it seems that the biggest hop state is also the world's largest hop laboratory. And I, for one, am really looking forward to seeing what great new varieties come out of there in the coming years. What do you think of all these beer industry numbers, and have you ever tried growing hops yourself? Let me know down in the comments section below. And while you're down there, head over to the Beer by the Numbers Facebook group. Lots of great channel updates and beer news being posted over there that I know you don't want to miss. Once again, this has been Ryan with Beer by the Numbers, and I'll see you next week with more growing beer content.